Sean Lambert, and we are back this year with another best war games of the year thing. Yeah, it's 2024, and I've had another year playing war games. Last year was technically my first full year of just pretty much only playing war games. So without further ado, let's introduce the list. All right, here we go. We have our list of honorable mentions, and this year this list includes quite a few games, 10 total games on my honorable mentions list, which is almost exactly what I did last year. Out of this list here, we have a nice mix of computer and tabletop games. This is mostly computer games on the honorable mention list. It gets a little bit more tabletop heavy on the main list, but there's 3 tabletop games here. So the first game on this list is DAC 2. DAC 2 is a remake of the original DAC, and it is a part of the OCS family. And the reason that I got kind of into DAC and into North Africa games in general is I was actually running a campaign for North Africa Kriegspiel for about half the year, from May till October. And in that Kriegspiel, I wanted to base it upon some games I like. So I did play a little bit of campaign for North Africa itself. As you would expect, it was a challenging game to play, even with all the modern tools. But I think we made it through a turn, maybe 2. And then we were like, okay, we get it. We get why this is a cool game. But unless you have a really dedicated wargaming group, that's a tough one to continue playing. And that's really the downside to it. It's not that it's the most complicated game in the world. It's that it's time consuming and you need a dedicated group because it's not that fun by yourself. Campaign for North Africa is not fun by yourself, but DAC is fun by yourself. OCS, I think, is one of those systems where you can play it by yourself and it's still fun. It is probably about 3/4 the amount of fun when you play it by yourself, but it is a huge game. So if you're playing DAC or some of the bigger OCS games, chances are you're going to be playing on Vassal. And in that regard, I think the Vassal module itself is extremely good for DAC, and I would highly recommend playing this one. I think this is the oldest game on my list, maybe, but it's a great game, a lot of fun. I wish they would reprint it so I could play it in real life, but this is one of the games that I don't own. Next is Command Modern Operations, and CMO was on my list last year in the top 10, but barely. The reason it was barely on the list last year is because of mainly the intensity of the wargaming focus. Like, this is one of the most detailed war games ever. So it is that detail that kind of makes it interesting, but it comes at a big cost. So the actual playability of the game is not particularly high. It's a complicated game, and it's somewhat limited in what you can actually do in it when you don't have full knowledge of all the systems. But as a tool to kind of learn some of that knowledge, it's pretty good. The only problem I have is, you're learning these things that are, really detailed about it, but then you're not really imparting any agency on the game a lot of the time. It's just kind of like the scenario will run, and your decisions, while yes, they do affect things, I sometimes feel like they're almost pre-written. Like, a bad scenario will be bad no matter what. A good scenario will be good no matter what. And it's a very binary game. You're either having fun or you're having a miserable time. If you are the kind of person that loves to tinker with a game, it's perfect. It's great. I am sometimes like that, and depending on my mood, the game can be massively fun. But there are some bugs, some annoying things, and the quality of the game has actually decreased over time due to losing a license for some satellite data. not having GIS link-ins, so you can't bring in your own maps, which I would love to do. There's just some features that are paywalled behind the professional version, and because it is designed as a professional war game, there are things that they try to keep from the public version. Because if you're, the army, why are you going to pay $3,000 a copy for the full version when you could just get the cheap version and it would do the same thing? So, I mean, it's a good game, but not a great game. That's how I would put it. But came out in 2019, and it still does receive regular updates, so it's not a dead game. There's still a potential that it could come back and get better. So it scored pretty well this year, 5.86. But where it kills itself is the fun and the visuals. The visuals are terrible. Half the time they don't tell you what's even happening. Next we have Armored Brigade, and this is another game where I feel like it was on the cusp of being a really good game, but it's held back by some limited stuff in the visuals and in just ability to play it. And the rules and mechanics are just they're a mix of really crunchy and then really arcadey, which is kind of weird. It's like they wanted to make a fully detailed game, super intense, but then kind of ran out of gas. But it's still a good game. And the way I found out about this is there was some sort of like mapping contest for it. So I made a map for their new game, Armored Brigade 2, which I have not played. That's still in beta, I think. Alpha, I don't know. But probably by the time you watch this, if you're watching this in 2025, at some point they will have fully released the new game. I also really just I don't love modern games. I guess that's my biggest issue. And so I rate all of the modern games about the same when it comes to historical topic. It is not my favorite topic. And Cold War Goes Hot is just not that enthralling for me. Maybe it will be someday, but it isn't right now. And so that's really what killed this one, and the lack of play time. I have tried to play this several times, and every time I just get pulled out of it by some sort of like setup issue. Like just setting up a campaign to run is kind of a pain. I want to be able to have my custom campaign and just go and play it, and it's so annoying just to get the maps to load. So there's things about it I don't like, but within a single scenario, it is a fun game. So I rated that 5.57, and where it gets hurt is the hours played, really, compared to Command Modern Operations. But to me, they're the same, and they're in the same category. Modern games that I don't really love, like they're not the best, but they're probably the best options among modern games. Or if I were into modern games, they would probably be at the top of my list. It's just not my thing. Next, we have we have four in a row of medieval games. And medieval is another time period where I am not super interested. We have a 2024 release here, Manor Lords. Manor Lords is barely a war game. It is mostly a calm building game, but occasionally you have to do some RTS fighting stuff. But this one is probably visually is a great game. And if you look at it as a pure building game where you don't have to worry about the combat, that part is great. It's fantastic already. And technically this game is still in like early access beta testing, but I would say that part is feature complete. It works. It's a lot of fun. Where it's not quite feature complete is in the combat, where it's just kind of a rock paper scissors thing to some extent. It's got potential, but it's just a little wonky. You could do some things that are a little weird. Like you can, if your enemy is fighting somebody, you can go in and steal their loot before they've looted it. And the enemy doesn't really appear on the map, only his units do. And the amount of bad guys that you got to fight is just, it feels really high. I don't know. It feels like you're constantly fighting someone. And that's not really the best part of the game. The best part of the game is the building. Now, there are settings to turn the whole war game component of it off. So again, that's really where this one fell off the list. It's a 6.14, but because it's not really super war game focused, and I haven't played a lot of it, I've basically played 3 days of it. And in those 3 days, I loved my time, but because it's not really a pure war game and the war game components of it aren't really finished yet, I do knock it down for that. But this is definitely going to be back on the list next year, probably on my actual list. Next is Chivalry II. And this is basically a first-person shooter or first/third-person shooter with knights. You have a sword, you smack people with it. In my case, I only play the soldier guy, which you just have a pike or a halberd, and you smack people with it. But just with that basic concept of a whole bunch of people all trying to do that, then suddenly it gets pretty interesting. Now, to me, I don't know a ton about medieval history, but I am pretty sure that you couldn't do some of the stuff that you can do in this game. So it's not really meant to be a historical game. And it's not really a war game. Like, if you try to use real tactics in Chivalry, other than just grouping up and being near each other, I think that's a good tactic and it works. But other than that, like, it's not like you can do pike formations or anything. It really boils down to people are dueling, you come up behind them and stab them in the back. And that's the main way you get kills. So it's kind of one of those games where it's fun with friends. And to me, if a game is only fun with friends, then it's not a great game. It's just a good game. And you can make almost anything fun with friends. You can make, building a shed fun with friends. And I don't think that makes a game a great game. Next is Mount&Blade 2. And this one came out 2 years ago. And it is a really good game, but calling it a war game again, it's a little bit more of a war game than Shiv, but not by that much. But that said, the rules and mechanics and the visuals are both really, really good, well thought out, and it is really fun. It is pretty deep as well. In terms of depth, the main source of depth I see is just that it takes a long time to do everything, which I think is really good and makes it feel like any sort of progress is earned, which I really like in a RPG. But this game is mostly an RPG, to be fair. The war stuff is a sideshow to your development as a character and, trying to manage your own fiefs and all of the stuff that you are personally doing is all your party is with you, but really it would be better if you could just send them out and fight and not have to be there. So it's an interesting game, but I would still say it's just shy of being a great game. It's still a good game, but again, this one might sneak onto my list next year if I play it a little bit more. I just think it's not really a war game. It's an RPG. So if you're looking for a great RPG, if this was an RPG list, this would be on it. Then we have Plantagenet. Plantagenet is a game from GMT. It is difficult, very difficult. And I think the depth of it is surprising. I think I was surprised by how much strategy is required for it. And the main thing that keeps this one off my list is the fact that, again, it's not really a war game per se. I would still categorize this as more of a board game. You know, this is, if you took the theme out of it, it would still be the same game. And to me, that means it's not a war game. Levy and Campaign series is a pretty well-known series. And I think the things that make them not a war game are that the mechanics, when you strip back the theming, the mechanics are really board game mechanics. They're not war game mechanics. To me, it feels less like a war game than anything else that I've played. Gary Grigsby's War in the West, and I just got this one in the fall, so I barely played it. I installed it, fired up the campaign scenario, invaded Sicily, and that's all I've gotten through so far. So I started playing the Allied side. I'll play through the campaign Allied, and then try the German side. But just like War in the East, this is a very detailed game, and so far I gotta admit I was kind of struggling because so much is set up for you at the beginning, and it's just like, what do I have to do? And it seems like I didn't have to do anything to get it to work. I invaded successfully. Why? I don't know why it worked. So it's, from that standpoint, I have to get further into the game to understand the why of things. Because in War in the East, you're not doing naval invasions, and the air war part of War in the East is not that important relative to the ground war. And so once I figure out what I'm doing there, this will probably creep up the list next year. Then we have Graviteam Tactics Mia's Front, and there's a whole bunch of expansions from this. So the release year is a little bit of incorrect if you're playing the expansions, because the expansions are so much different than the base game in some cases, and better. So if you play the most recent Case Blue expansion, I think this game is probably on my list. I don't own that, but I think that expansion really pushes this one forward. It's about the Eastern Front. Love the Eastern Front, so that makes it a 10 out of 10 for a historical topic. It is visually a very good game. That's kind of the main part of it. I think it's pretty deep, because I still can't see all the mechanics of it, even having played it a fair amount, like 20 or 30 hours at this point. But I think what's keeping it off the list is I have not played it enough to find the fun. I haven't found what makes it fun. Like, I'm just still so wrapped up in learning the mechanics that I'm not having fun yet. And the rules and mechanics are kind of obfuscated in some cases. It's like, I don't know what the best option is, so I have a lot of analysis paralysis, and the matches end up taking a long time to play, like each of the little mini battles. And I don't think that is all that fun. So eventually this will probably creep up the list as well. I believe this game is made in Ukraine, so that's an interesting tidbit. Next we have Silent War 2.0, game that came out in 2023, but really it was the original Compass game. This was the first game that they ever published back when they started the company. It's a solitaire game, which is surprising that I don't like solitaire games all that much, and I still bought it. Basically because of the theme. I like the Pacific Submarine War, and there's very few games about the Pacific Submarine War. But to me, this one wasn't it. I had fun, but I think I'm realizing that you have to play a lot of hours of this to get deeper into the game to decide if you actually like it or not. So I just haven't made it that far. Again, eventually this might creep up further on the list, but I haven't gotten to the strategy part really yet. I've just been mechanically doing the turns and seeing if I win. 10 on the list is a game that was on the list last year. And last year it was still in early access. This year it technically came out. So you could say that the release year is 2024. But I kept the release into early access date just to show that it took 5 years to create this game. And I think that's an interesting tidbit. Because what this game is a simulation of kind of the entire U-boat war. You could play out the whole Battle of the Atlantic, basically, from the perspective of a U-boat. And that, in and of itself, is amazing. But this, like Silent War 2.0, you have to play a lot of this game to really enjoy it. And that's really where it's falling flat for me. I will play 1 or 2 sessions of it in a month, maybe if I'm lucky. But the problem is, if you're only playing a little bit of it at a time, you're not getting immersed enough to really enjoy it. So you really need full immersion in this game, and you just gotta dump a ton of hours into it, and then it will be fun. But the stuff that they added at Go Live, like the targeting computer and some of the realism features, that really pushed this game into another category of quality. Now, I do think that it could use kind of an instant action mode that would be fun, like an interesting scenario mode, maybe some historical scenarios. But the campaign itself just put you in historical positions. It's just, I would like to jump into the later war periods with a fully kitted out crew and stuff like that. I suppose there's probably a way to do it. Again, I haven't bothered learning that way. But it is fun. All right, at number 9 we have Napoleon's Eagles. This is formerly known as War and Peace, and it is a computerization of the War and Peace board game. So this one kind of spans the line between board and computer game. And if you've ever played the board game, you would know that it's an extremely deep game. There's a lot you could do with it. The main reason that this one eked out a win over U-Boat is on its pure wargaming focus. U-Boat is a little bit of an RPG, a little bit of a war game. In the case of War and Peace, or Napoleon's Eagles as it's now called, it's really the historical topic and the wargaming focus that sets it apart, but it is at least as fun as any other war game. There's moments that are less fun than others, but I love the rules themselves as well. I find the rules very inspiring, and the visuals are pretty good. Again, it's not that much better visuals than you could get in something like a Vassal, but they're a little bit better, I will admit. And so it's really the fun and the depth, the quality of the rules, and more importantly, the topic. Because as far as Napoleonic games on the computer, there's not that many that are good. There's really not that many. If you're not a Creative Assembly Total War aficionado, which I no longer am personally. After the Warhammer games came out, I stopped enjoying them. So if you are not a dedicated Napoleon Total War player, then your options are pretty limited. So I think having more options is always good. And this was developed in a way that I can really appreciate the struggles they went through, because they got the game to market, and then they immediately got a cease and desist or something from the legacy owners of I think this was an Avalon Hill game. So I assume this was from Hasbro that was kind of telling them they didn't have the copyright. Because I guess the issue is they had the copyright to the board game, but they didn't have the copyright to a video game version of it, because there was no copyright for a video game version. So it sounded very complicated. Basically, they were just like, all right, whatever, we'll change the name. So they changed the name. But very fun game, lots and lots of scenarios, and one that basically I just need to play more of. Then we have BCS, The Last Blitzkrieg. This is the BCS version of the Battle of the Bulge. And other than Bitter Woods, I have played a couple of other Battle of the Bulge games, including the Wacht am Rhein, the Goss Battle of the Bulge. I didn't particularly enjoy that one. I found it very cumbersome. So BCS is, I would say, actually also relatively cumbersome, and the rules and mechanics are somewhat unconventional. Not to say that they're bad, but they're unconventional. So I do think it's a good game, and I do think it's worth playing if you want to try it. But expect to struggle with the rules a little bit. I think they're not intuitive, is how I would frame it. But the game itself is really a fun game when you get into the meat of it. The first few turns are kind of tricky. I'm not gonna lie, that like you don't really know until you've played it a few times. You don't really know what you're doing, and so you make a lot of stupid mistakes that leave yourself open to getting exploited, which is never fun. But the same could be said about any war game. But to me, the bigger issue is that it's no longer really easily attainable as if you wanted to buy this game. However, BCS is coming out with a new game that just went into pre-order called Inflection Point, and this game sounds very, very interesting. It's a 2-pack where you get 2 Eastern Front battles, and I think that one will definitely be featured highly on my channel. All right, at number 7 we have the I think the only naval game other than U-Boat that's on my big list, but it is Rule the Waves 3. And I have played Rule the Waves 1, I skipped 2, and now I've gone straight to 3. And what's good about 3 that I think is lacking in the first version is that it goes through World War II. So you can get carriers and stuff. And technically you can go all the way to the Missile Age. So in terms of the campaign, it's a lot deeper now. And I think the improvements that they made to the campaign itself are also really good. However, visually and performance-wise, if you are trying to like stream this game to your laptop, for example, off your desktop, it won't work. It's an older style of programming where everything is a separate window. So if you are trying to record the game, it's also a pain. You got to just screen cap everything. And just in general, the visuals are the last thing on their minds. So this game really could use a modernization effort to at least make the game recordable or more recordable and somewhat more user-friendly in terms of just the product itself. So it needs some visual enhancements just to make it a little bit more playable. But designing ships is so fun. It's so fun. It's like the best parts of Hearts of Iron, where you are designing ships and tanks and planes. You get to do that stuff in this game, but it's way better, way more detailed. And then you get to go and fight them and find out if they're good or not. It's so fun. And you can control at the fleet level or at like a squadron level, or you can control the individual ships. So you could kind of change your play style. The current playthrough I'm doing, I'm kind of playing as the French, and I have this great book on the French Navy in the time period of the game. And so I've been playing along with the French and reading about all the stuff that the French Navy was doing at the time. This book is really, really impressive. Highly recommend it. And highly recommend Rule the Waves 3. I think there's no reason that you would go back to 1 or 2 because they are not on Steam. You have to buy the license from their store and then not lose it, which I have managed not to do. I have kept my license to Rule the Waves 1 so far. But definitely recommend this one. At number 6, we have the game Prelude to Vicksburg. And this is from Revolution Games. It's part of the larger Luttman verse, let's call it. These games are all made by Herman Luttman, and this Prelude to Vicksburg is a part of the Vicksburg map. If you were to like zoom it out a million miles and take a look at all the battlefields, this one would be one of the ones that I probably would pick. What it is very much a kind of tactical level Civil War game, but probably a step up from tactical. It's like a mix of tactical and operational. And just like the Blind Sword system, the other games in the Blind Sword system, and the Black Swan system that will be featured later on this list, the Blind Sword system is such a well-developed system that if you've played any of the other Blind Swords games, you will instantly be able to jump into this one, like I did. And we only got to play, a couple of short scenarios, but I really want to play more of this one, and probably will be. So if you're into the Civil War games or are looking for a game on a battle you didn't know, then Prelude to Vicksburg, Chickasaw Bayou is definitely the way to go. Number 5. Wow, we are blasting through this list. Bitter Woods. Bitter Woods is my Battle of the Bulge game of choice. And I know I had BCS Battle of the Bulge on here as well, but I think Bitter Woods is better in every way because it has the right battlefield. BCS does not have Liège on the map, which is bizarre. It also has such a great scale. Like, I love the regimental scale. Both games are similar in that they are more detailed than just divisional level games. I don't think a division level Battle of the Bulge game would interest me as much. I think regimental is perfect. I think battalion level is a little bit too low. There's too many pieces. So this game is great. I am not that good at it. I get smashed anytime I play someone who knows what they're doing. But it's fun. It's a lot of fun. And I like playing it with other people. I like playing it by myself. And this being the anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge, as we speak, I am very tempted to break it out and play a round of it. It's the kind of game that you can play in an afternoon in the tournament scenarios, but the full campaign, you really got to dedicate a full day, maybe a day and a half realistically to it if you want to really enjoy it. And it's great played multiplayer too. It's not really advertised as such, but if you go to a convention where they're playing it, there's always a multiplayer game that gets played. 2 or 3 people on a side. 2 is best because they kind of split half the map up and go through the turns a little bit faster. Some people to chit chat with, but really fun game. Its main competition this year has been from The Last Gamble, which is a remake of Hitler's Last Gamble. And that game also saw a lot of play at Compass Expo in the fall. But I think, again, going more detailed is not always better for certain battles. And to me, for World War II, regimental scale is where it's at. I know some people love the more detail, but I like it a little bit more zoomed out so I can see the whole battle. And I think the regimental scale just works. I think it's the perfect scale for World War II games. Any tighter and you get You don't get through enough of the battle unless you're willing to devote a ton of time to it. And any wider, then you're suddenly at like almost the strategic level. So I think it's a great game. Highly recommend it whenever you decide that you want to play a bulge game. This one is good because you can always pull it out. And if you do decide that you want to go down the battalion route, like if you play a lot of Bitter Woods and then decide, well, this really just isn't detailed enough for me, there's great news, because A Time for Trumpets is basically Bitter Woods with battalions. And so you can kind of go from Bitter Woods to Time for Trumpets and use your knowledge that you've learned from Bitter Woods in that other game, and it will immediately put you off on a better foot than all the people that whine about the rule book of A Time for Trumpets. So, again, Bitter Woods, one of the best games that I've ever played, and a great war game. If you are looking to get into the Battle of the Bulge, this is the best entry point. This is the version you want to get. You want to get the Compass Games version if you can. All right, next on our list is Fall Blau, also Compass Games. And this is the newest game in my collection. It is kind of a game-changing game for me, because I kind of thought that I had everything I needed for the Eastern Front already in the box of War in the East. But what I found out is that I really like the Fall Blau campaign in general. And then I started reading about what games are available for Fall Blau, because getting the OCS version, very expensive. Case Blue for OCS is hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And it's a great system and a great game, but it's also a lot of table space. So not that Fall Blau is less table space. This is a huge game, but the scenarios in it allow you to play with parts of the map. So that's kind of what sold me on it. But the more important to that was it shares the rules, or some of the rules of SPI's Operation Typhoon, which incidentally I found out is getting reprinted and is currently available for like $114 or something like that. And what I wanted to experience was this variable combat value system. So how it works is you draw a chit that tells you the possible combat value of your unit. So it has 3 letters, A, B, C. If you have a C unit, you'll get 1 value off that chit. But all the chits are kind of randomized. I think it ranges a fair amount. Like there's a variance of 5 or 6 from worst to best. And so your combat strength is dependent on the draw from the cup, which I think is a brilliant way. Now, I will say it's a little bit finicky, dealing with those stacks of variable point chits, because it adds a lot of extra pieces. But I love that how much flexibility that adds to the game, and how much replayability that adds to the game. Such a cool idea, such a cool system. And it goes back again to the SPI days. It's hardly, limited to games that are inspired by that, as it's kind of a convergent evolution in games. But this particular game, Fall Blau, uses it very well, because I think the units that they pick to have the chit draws are mostly the stronger units. And then you have a ton of rifle divisions for the Russians that are literally just one step and you just blow them away. So the combination of the regular units that don't have combat value draws and the ones that do have combat value draws really make the game interesting. And also it adds steps to units. So you're not just a 1-step or a 2-step unit now, you're like a 3-step unit, which is cool. So definitely recommend getting Fall Blau. It is a bit of an older game, came out in 2014, I guess 10 years old, but it will definitely satisfy your hunger for a battle in the East. All right, now we're into our top 3. And at number 3, we have another Eastern Front game, and it is another OCS game, Crimea. OCS Crimea Conquest and Liberation. This is the newest OCS game, technically, until Forgotten Battles starts shipping in what I assume to be a couple of weeks, if not days, at this point. And Forgotten Battles takes you a little bit further north, but covers Crimea also covers 1941, and the 1941 portion of Crimea is really, really good. And I have one of the Crimea scenarios set up on the table behind me here, but it's just such a good game. And it's one that you can play pretty much endlessly. It comes with 4 scenarios that require just this game. And then on top of that, there's a couple of linking scenarios. So if you happen to own the Third Winter, which takes place directly to the north of Crimea, you can link in Crimea with that. And then if you own those 2, you can link in Forgotten Battles, which is north of that. And then if you own those 3, you can link in Hero City, which is north in the Leningrad area, after that. So you can have the entire Eastern Front in 1943 to 44 all set up based on the linking scenario rules. And eventually, I believe, and this is what I've heard, maybe this isn't going to happen, but I believe their plan in the long term is to release a massive Ostfront battle pack where you get all these games in one gigantic, I assume the box will be like, but I'm looking forward to that. I probably will buy that. So I'm going to try to resist the urge to punch the ticket on all the games as they come out. And I kind of missed the boat on Third Winter. I didn't play OCS yet, but it's such an exciting system, and it's one that makes you feel like an absolute buffoon when you do things wrong, and then it makes you feel like a genius when you do things right. And I think that is the hallmark of a great game, is it makes you feel really, really good when you do things that are smart, and it gives you a lot of opportunities to make dumb decisions. But the cool thing is just seeing a frontline collapse because of a well-laid plan that you started 20 turns ago. And I just think that's so cool. I love the rules of it. And I love the way that it's the logistics that are wearing the enemy down. Not so much you, but their own mechanics are partially responsible for wearing them down. Great series, great game. And like I said, you get a lot in the box. So OCS Crimea, highly recommend it. And it is number 3 on our list. For those of you out there that really enjoy the Civil War and who have grown up near Civil War battlefields, maybe you've gone to Gettysburg a few times, then this is definitely the game for you, because and it was a tough call between this and our eventual winner of 2024, but personally, I actually found this to be possibly the most fun of the war games that I played this year. A Most Fearful Sacrifice, and this was reprinted this year from Flying Pig Games. It's an absolute monster of a game. Very heavy because it has a mounted map board, and that map board features one of the best Rick Barber maps available. And the gameplay is basically blind swords, but with cards. So the blind sword system is, like I said in Prelude to Vicksburg, is such a well thought out system and well developed that moving it to the cards is perfect, because The cards have advantages in amount of description you can have on the cards. You can read what the events are that you're drawing. It lets you have this system where you can, order your cards around, not just a chit. So it gives you a little bit more information, a little bit more flavor. But really, the rules are just the starting point, because the rules are great, but it's the scenario, the battle itself that is really fun. And I have now played all 3 days in various ways. So we played the first day, the whole day, starting from the get-go, the whole map. Then we played the second day, started that whole day with the full map. And then I have personally gone through and played all 3 days by myself. And the third day is hard to get to, I will admit. But if you want to play Gettysburg in the most accessible format, it's such an easy game to pick up and play. Even if you only play it once a year, twice a year, it is going to be that game for you where when you get the Civil War Gettysburg itch, it will scratch it and then some. And next up on their list of Blind Swords Black Swan system games is a Chickamauga game. So if you're really interested in a Most Fearful Sacrifice, the next game is the Rock of Chickamauga. And Chickamauga is a map, as well as Gettysburg, that is really unique, and that you can use, play over and over again and really learn every part of the map. And I think that's what's so good about Wargaming Gettysburg, is that the places where you fight, you just have such a deep historical connection with them, because it's such a famous battle. You can watch the movies and play the game at the same time, and just have a full day of Gettysburg goodness. And that's, I think, the best way to experience it, is to just devote a full weekend to just play the game with somebody and really enjoy it once or twice a year when you break it out. And it will give you that complete experience. And that's really what sells me on a war game is, do I feel satisfied when I'm done with it? And a Most Fearful Sacrifice, you feel fully satisfied that you got to play that part of the battle, or that entire battle, and you don't feel like you missed anything, like you regret playing that game. So highly recommend it. Again, whenever it comes up on reprint, snap it up off of Kickstarter, because getting it off the secondary market is very expensive and very difficult. So highly recommend buying it if they do reprint it again. Well, that only leaves one game left. And I suppose it should come as no surprise that it is the same game as last year. Gary Grigsby's War and These Two. This is a game that came out in 2021 and has now completed its development life cycle, with its last patch coming out earlier this year. And to me, it's been a life-changing game, because it finally opened the door to the idea that you can have really complicated games, really deep games, that are not MOBAs or shooters or anything like that, don't sap the years off your life when you're playing them. But it gives me that same feel of, like ladder pressure, ladder anxiety is what it's called in StarCraft. But it gives you that sense of foreboding when you click the end turn button. And like like I was mentioning earlier, where I think it was in OCS, where it exposes when you make a mistake, it makes you feel like a buffoon. And when you do something cool, it makes you feel so damn smart. And I like feeling smart. So, controversial opinion, but I think making yourself feel smart is a good thing in war games. It's a feature that people don't usually discuss all that much. But I think a game that makes you feel smart is worth its weight in gold, because I think a lot of war gamers like to feel superior, like to feel smart. And War in the East 2 is the perfect way to make yourself feel smart, because it's such a deep game. There's so many things going on, and every time you're going into the game, you're kind of exploring another piece of the puzzle. You're unwrapping this really delicate Fabergé egg, and then when you crack that egg open, you get to a giant diamond in the inside, and then you realize that that diamond was there all along, and it's really just your playing of a game that makes you feel happy. So to me, it unlocked a hobby, and that's why it's still my number one, because it keeps me coming back. It keeps me locked into this hobby. Whereas the effort it takes to set up a tabletop game does kind of knock them down just a little bit. The computer version of that same experience is pretty much non-existent outside of the Gary Grigsby games. So getting a monster game into a computer game is such a massive achievement, and it does all the things that you would imagine a really good monster game could do, but it does them easily and makes them seamless and smooth. And I think that's what the part of the game that I don't always value. I kind of take for granted how just easy everything is to do. That it's just great, and it's one of these games that once you've committed enough time to it, it'll keep you coming back and back and back, because you always just want to think about that one scenario. So I always think of the best games are the ones where you're thinking about them when you're not playing them. And for me, I think a lot about War in the East when I'm not playing it. And I'm always like, oh, I really want to do this. I want to do this. I want to do Operation such and such. So I think that's really what has kept it on my top 10, is my personal connection to it. But outside of that, it's still a great game, and now that it's fully feature complete, highly recommend picking it up, especially if it goes on sale. But a lot of people are like, oh, $80 for a game, or I guess $100 with the DLC. Seems like a lot. Well, I mean, you're going to be shelling out way more than that for something like this, or even Fall Blau at full price, it's like $120. So again, there's ways you can always find a sale. So if the money is the problem, then that's not really the game now, is it? It's paying for it. If a game is like $1,000, okay, then I'll say, yeah, that's a little ridiculous. Or $500 commercial off the shelf, not on a resale market. Then yeah, okay, then it's a little bit ridiculous. But $80 for a game is somewhat becoming the norm. If you're buying a AAA game, it's going to be $80. And AAA studios ain't going to be making anything like this. And the fact that it's made by a small team, a dedicated team, and a gazillion testers, the number of people who tested this game is extremely high. So it has been really worked over, but because it's such a deep game, you're always going to find something. It's like you're exploring the game as well as playing it. And I like that part. I think if I were to categorize myself as a gamer, I think I am always seeking mastery of a game. Like I want to be good at it, but I want to explore things within that game. So I'm kind of a mix of a mastery hunter and a pure explorer. I'm not an explorer in the sense that I want to explore lots of different games, although you could see this year I did play a lot of different games. I'm more an explorer within a game. I want to try a lot of different things. And I think that War in the East 2 gives me that. I hope you enjoyed this video. I never know how people do the review thing year round, because I find this kind of video very difficult to make, ranking games and talking about how you feel about the games. I like to just film myself playing the games. I realize that that doesn't get clicks on YouTube because YouTube is trying to sell games, not show games. But to me, I think at least once a year, going through and talking about all the games I've played and all the games that I've enjoyed and loved and that you should definitely play if it's anywhere on this list. Honestly, I have done thorough research on it and have agonized over the purchase. So I don't play any of these games lightly. I don't buy any of these games lightly. And if it has made my list in any way, shape, or form, consider that a recommendation. If you find that you don't enjoy one of these games, by all means, let me know. But I think playing any of the games off this list, you will really have a fun time, and it will expose you to a part of the hobby that I think is really worthwhile. So until next year, as this is the last video of the year for me, hope that you have a great New Year. Hope you had a great Christmas. And I hope that the next year is filled with a lot of wargaming. And if you enjoy RPGs, play a lot of those too. But until next year, see ya.